Dear people, welcome. Let's start. First of all, may I ask you to turn off these phones? And then, okay, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Professor Boswell for this seminar at the ASC, because he was one of my first PhD students, that's one thing. And secondly, she's a stellar social anthropologist, scholar in South Africa. So we welcome her cordially to the ASC. She is a professor at DSI NRF South African Research Chair in Ocean Cultures and Heritage at Nelson Mandela University in Port Elizabeth in South Africa. You have read the introduction, I'll not make it too long. We are very fortunate to have her here. She's a versatile scholar. She has produced 5 books, poetry. She has a rich experience in various registers of academic life, as well as, you know, the border of literature, cultural studies and poetry on various issues. Her research is, I find, highly original and exploring boundaries and combining new genres together in a kind of anthropological reflection, exploration of what it means to be human in various contexts and classes and countries. She has rich fieldwork experience in, I think, at least 6-7 countries, from Namibia to the Seychelles. And her current project about ocean cultures and heritage is really challenging. I looked at some of the products and the research teams. It's fascinating. It calls upon upon us to reflect on new dimensions, on transspecies issues as well. So we really welcome you, Rose, for this presentation. I will keep my mouth shut and give you the floor as soon as possible. Thank you.
Is the PowerPoint somewhere there? Is it there?
Yes. I think we can just you share screen.
Okay.
Share screen.
The bottom.
So let's have you speak for about 45 minutes, 50 minutes, then discussion, and then we close the session about 5, I think. So.
Thank you very much, Prof. Abik, for that warm and very generous introduction. Really, yeah, I'm really happy to be here after quite some time. It's incredible how time also has an impact on how we think and also how we perceive the places that we go to as field researchers, and also how we also engage with local communities. It's very different. I think time does make the difference. There is a little bit of enthusiasm, I suppose, when you're a lot younger and, you know, sort of headlong into the field using the newly minted, you know, methods and methodologies. But over time, that becomes tempered, and we begin to see our supposed research subjects as actual human beings from whom we can learn a great deal, not just for the research and academic enterprise, but also for ourselves as human beings. And so what I want to talk to you about today is to share some of my research, but to also speak quite specifically about the Blue Values Journey project and the Blue Values ethos, which we have been using in our research team. Sure. We have been using in our research team to really understand 2 issues. One, cultural heritage, specifically intangible cultural heritage, which I will explain in a few moments, as well as resilience, how we can perceive through intangible cultural heritage, how we can perceive resilience, especially in coastal communities and island communities of the Southwest Indian Ocean region, that to our knowledge are going to be quite affected or most affected with the impending sea level rise and the climate change crisis, which we are all to varying degrees experiencing today. And I want to advance the view that from my MA days as a master's student many years ago at the University of Cape Town, where I did an applied anthropology degree before I came to VU to do the PhD, that we can put this knowledge into practice, and that specifically for Southern Africa, where I live and where I come from, there is no time left. We actually need to put into practice now. The time for sitting back and having the self-reflexive discussions, which are really important for the academic context, that time has rapidly elapsed, and we desperately, as the more senior anthropologists in Southern Africa, we need to put this knowledge to practice, and that means gathering information, gathering data in different countries. Professor Abing mentioned 5 or 6 countries for the Ocean Cultures and Heritage Project that is funded by the National Research Foundation in South Africa. We're looking at intangible cultural heritage in 5 African countries. And so we have researchers, PhDs in these different countries: Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, Kenya, and Tanzania. And they're exploring different aspects of coastal cultural heritage. And the purpose of this is to use our local scholars who have perhaps a closer and more accurate insight into some of the social dynamics in these local contexts, but we also engage with them on a regular basis to ensure that we are still having a continental and global dialogue, so that they don't feel that they're left out in the field by themselves. So there are three elements that I want to encapsulate today in the presentation. One, the Blue Values Journey, Blue Values Ethos, Blue Values Project, and then, of course, the issue of resilience and the management of intangible cultural heritage in these countries. Just a quick overview, some of the things that have been, some of the books, some of which are co-authorships and co-editorships. But these top 3 are the, I think, quite important ones, and maybe this poetry anthology, Between Worlds. The Palgrave Handbook of Blue Heritage, which is a co-edited book of some 20 chapters, spanning the sort of transdisciplinary account of oceanic coastal cultural heritages. We have lawyers and artists and anthropologists that have contributed to this book. And then the most recent 2 that were published now in February 2024, one is a transdisciplinary output. It's a photographic book that gives us a visual representation or an imaging, if you like, of coastal cultural identities in Africa. So we have examples there in ocean beings from Lamu, Kenya, from Namibia and South Africa. And then the latest poetry anthology called Love O'Brien, which looks at what I call the intimacy, which was actually the presentation that I did earlier this afternoon around human emotional relationships with nature, given the breakdown in many instances of human to human relationships as a result of mediatization and the digital space, which is creating various forms of distances between people. So there's almost like a deep Mary Oliver-esque return to nature. Mary Oliver, for those of you who don't know, is a phenomenal poet of nature. I can't recite any now, my brain has gone blank, but she literally, I think Wild Geese is one of them, about this, really this phenomenal intimate relationship that humans have with nature, that as a result of processes of modernization, we have been severed. We have been cut off in many ways from this visceral experience of nature. And Between Worlds also articulates that, because that ambiguity that we experience as human beings between occupying the modern institutionalized kind of reality in which we're all embedded, where there are very definite methods and methodologies that we need to follow. And then, of course, the real life experience of ambiguity and not knowing and time and the effects of these temporal uncertainties on our our realities as human beings. So I encourage you to go and have a look if you're interested. And if you want to know more, I can share some of the poetry at a later stage. But let's get back to the NRF project and to let you know how the Blue Journey initiative came to be. The key question for the NRF National Research Foundation project is, what does the sea actually mean to you as a human being? That's really the core question. And from this flow a series of questions around the role of the sea in psychosocial health, the role of the sea in transmateriality, the borders of the body, the visceral experience of the ocean, the sea as a space of social dynamics, exploration and development, the sea as part of the blue economy, the sea as part of commercialization, and connectivities through ports and maritime histories. So our students are exploring this question of what does the sea mean to us as human beings? And in essence, as you can imagine, there have been many different answers as to what it is that the sea actually means to us. And the answers are also profoundly cultural in the sense that there are different perspectives that are arising from indigenous groupings in Southern Africa, First Nations Khoi people, for example, versus commercial real estate developers, what the sea actually means to them as a place of investment, or even leisure users of the sea, people who are surfers, who are swimmers, who have a home by the sea. And we can extrapolate from these answers various things. One is that the ocean has a deep economic value to the nation state, to the national government, and to international investors. But it also has a cultural value. It also has a spiritual value, and it has a gendered value, because there were quite a distinction between how many women told us about what the sea meant to them versus what men indicated. So I will explore this in a little while. But we were also troubled. We were deeply troubled because we realized that we knew and had read, obviously, about the current climate crisis, about the anthropogenic impacts on Earth, the negative anthropogenic impacts on Earth, and the fact that this has almost, some would argue, led us to a place of extinction, an extinction level crisis, they say. That if we don't turn back now, according to the various COP meetings that are taking place globally, that we're going to find ourselves in a situation of no return. And the work in particular that troubled us as a team, and me in particular as someone who's leading this team, is the idea of the necrocene. So the necrocene, which kind of in a way echoes Achille Mbembe's necropolitics, many of you will be familiar with this, talks about an epoch of death and mass destruction, and nearing at the end of the long history of empire and domination, and where we're faced with the choice of either continuing the path of social and ecological disintegration or initiating a new era of social and ecological regeneration, the point literally of no return. And I was troubled by this, but I was also fascinated by it, because I wondered to what extent it is true everywhere. Because we were doing field research, I had done field research in the Southwest Indian Ocean from my PhD time, from 99 to 2003, and then continuing with various stints after that. And I had students that were also doing work in Mauritius, and colleagues that were doing work in the Indian Ocean World Global Scholarship Forum. People were doing work in Madagascar, in Comoros, and so on. And I wanted to understand whether this idea of this necrocene, the certainty of where it is we're going, is going to be the same for everyone. And what we would need in order to be able to address some of these really difficult challenges which are coming, which are going to have an impact, not just on where we live and how we live, but for me, who's interested in sensory ethnography, I also felt is going to have an impact on the body and the way in which we experience these challenges. So I suppose, like most people, my first response was to develop a level of anxiety about it, because how do we respond? What can we do? Of course, there are these high-level discussions that are taking place. I mean, next week, for example, there is the UN Ocean Decade Conference taking place in Barcelona, where there are many side events, high-level discussions around what can be done, what policy interventions can be implemented to ensure that national governments are really paying attention, not only to achieving, the blue economy imperatives of growth, but potentially to look at degrowth, to potentially look at ways in which we can turn, to use a sea metaphor, to turn that ship basically around. So there's a lot of anxiety, and in the literature as well. If you read on climate change, climate crisis, and also in my own, sort of broader global networks of colleagues that I've been working with in the last 5 years, that level of anxiety is actually very, very high, as to, what is it that we can do to basically address these challenges. So we went back to look at what data we had collected, because I feel that with anthropology, we and this came to me from a current colleague and also former mentor who I know has been here on many occasions, Francis Nyamjo. We've worked together on and off for several years, and I still talk to him about various ideas. And he always used to say, your data is not just a dress that you wear for one occasion. He always used to say, go back to your data, even if your data is 5, 10, 20 years, go back into that field data, go look at what the original raw findings were, and see if there's anything new that this data tells you. Because you can always, he said, you can always put this dress on in a different way, and it can tell you something completely different. So we've kept a hold of our data, and we've been collecting systematically now since the pandemic. So since October 2020, actually, the researchers were specifically working in South Africa at the time. And we collected something up to now, we have about sort of 500 odd interviews of about between 40 minutes to 1.5 hours each on what the ocean actually means to local communities. And when I say this 500 interviews, not just me, it's a group of about 10 or 15 people in the team that is collecting this data. Sorry, let me just go back. And this data is clearly showing that, first of all, the different levels of human visceral engagement with the ocean. As I was explaining very briefly to the masterclass earlier on this afternoon, we're uncovering that, for example, the First Nations people in South Africa, especially the people known as the Xhosa-speaking peoples, the indigenous Nguni peoples, that they believe that Ulwandle, the sea, is a place where the ancestors reside. It's a spiritual home of the ancestors. And if there's any kind of, offshore exploration, development, trawling that's going to happen in that ocean, we need to consider the spiritual dimension of the ocean. So the sea is itself a sacred site for millions of South Africans. Then we have the First Nation Khoi peoples, who are themselves divided into many different houses all across the Western Cape and Eastern Cape provinces of the country. And the First Nations people are telling us that, okay, well, we need to consider that all along what is known as the famous garden route of South Africa, we have a series of archaeologically significant caves, but they're not just significant for archaeological purposes. They contain the material history, the material culture of the First Nations people, because they are still using those caves for ritual purposes. They have a whole set of moon rituals, which they call the Now rituals, which they effect in these caves. And so again, if there's anything that's going to impact the coast, offshore development, real estate development, it's going to have an impact on these caves. So we've done all this field work along the South African coast. And then of course, in the countries that we've indicated there, including in October of last year, we were doing some really interesting work, which I'm going to tell you about now, in the Seychelles on resilience. So in the arguments that we are, maybe I should just try and move this, right, so that you can see. Sorry about this. There you go. So the arguments we are developing in the epoch of climate change and its negative or deleterious impacts on the planet. I've said this, there is significant anxiety about the future and whether humans will be able to survive the challenges of a dramatically changed environment. And what I've been proposing in a series of papers, and I reiterate this here, is that we need to consider psychosocially relevant and micro solutions to the challenge of survival and an emerging epoch of a changed climate. So we can have these fantastic high-level discussions, the COP discussions, the policy level discussions that are really critical for changing how national governments and even continental authorities perceive climate change. But we also need to go in, we need to use the emic perspective of the social sciences and of anthropology in particular to understand how local communities are really responding to some of these challenges. So the paper, as I said, indicates the place of ICH and resilience, indicating how for African peoples in South Africa and Kenya and elsewhere, how they have been using ICH as a way to respond to the various shocks of the uncertainty arising in a time of climate change. And I offer several points. The one key argument is what I call suspended anticipation. And before I lose the thread of thought, I'm going to tell you exactly what I mean by this. Suspended anticipation, we were working with this idea that in Southern Africa, and maybe perhaps in Africa in general, where we have a lot of poverty and inequality, we cannot anticipate. Very difficult to anticipate the future. There are a lot of uncertainties. And so people have lived with uncertainty for generations. And the level of anxiety that people have is perhaps very different, because anxiety is something that people live with almost on a regular daily basis. So there is a sense of suspended anticipation. They've suspended it. They're not anticipating a future a process or a politics of inevitability. And then, of course, resilience, we have to be very careful of, because we can adopt a very positive, normative kind of account of resilience, something as, you know, it's something that people must be able to do, and we just are completely oblivious to the social and political contexts, the inequalities that people are actually living in. For example, I mentioned that South Africa, for instance, is considered to be one of the most unequal societies in the world. Phenomenal levels of poverty and hardship that are growing with each day as the state infrastructure basically, I dare I say it, is collapsing. So this idea of resilience is also a precarious state. It's not a linear process, you achieve it. It's prone to reversals. There are moments when one can feel that one is resilient and one is coping, and then there are actual moments when it actually collapses, and you know, and things literally, as Chinua Achebe said, things fall apart. Of course, you know, there are, just to keep on that second point, one of the ways of dealing with these anxieties, especially in the African descendant communities, they're all manner of ways of dealing with time. So not really being present in the present, either thinking about the past, the pre-colonial past as this idealized time, perfect time, or living in the future as something that is still to come, a better future of liberation and equality, or forgetting, as in the work of Jennifer Cole in Madagascar, forgetting colonialism, perhaps not acknowledging that it's there in order not to experience the violence of the present times. But strangely enough, there is also, because of the sensory ethnography work, there's also politics and an embodied memory, where the body is actually remembering all of these things, even though the mind, cognitively, the mind is trying to forget. The third one is the storytelling and social media documentation, which for us, we've seen this firsthand, how it can assist in the release of trauma. And this is where the Blue Journey project comes in, the release of trauma and the improvement of resilience, connection with other online communities, group storytelling and confession. One particular revealing moment for us, just a little 5-second side story, was in Namibia last year, in an area that's far inland, a community where the San peoples have been living for generations. And for the first time ever, we were filming in that area. We had our video colleague with us, and we were handing out the recorders because we want to capture the voices so we can perhaps see how this can be used in making this cultural heritage more visible to a global audience. And people wouldn't let go of the recorders. There was one man in particular, and he was holding it like this, and he was, I have to tell everything. I have to say everything. He'd been waiting for so long to tell the story. So storytelling for us, it's very much an embodied thing, because it's the bitterness of the past. I've talked about this in another paper on sensuous storytelling in the Indian Ocean region. It's about relating the bitterness of the past, but also about sweet memories. And it's about release. It's a physical release of the stories that have been kept inside. And so it really connected people. Storytelling really connected people. And it's also for those who have not had these experiences, who've not heard these stories. If we can put some of these stories into the social media space, then other people can get to understand what is happening in an area. Perhaps they'll never have the opportunity to go deep into the heart of Namibia, for example. But we were also, because of the transdisciplinary work that we're doing, I'm going to flash through this particular slide. We're very conscious of the discourses that are prevalent out there. I call this a sort of a discourse of inevitability. Because we are hurtling towards this climate change story, which of course we're all very much aware of, and the science is telling us this is a truth, but it's not telling us about how it is that we're all going to get there and how we're going to respond when we arrive. So reading the blue economy concept in the Western Indian Ocean region, there was I just want to quickly say something about that from the written piece. Just give me a second to find it. This was a paper published in 2022 by Karani et al. And he basically, just to quote a few lines, it says, the blue economy has been defined as a concept that embraces both marine and fresh waters. It is a concept developed primarily out of the green movement, which saw the term green economy grow in stature. And thereafter, the blue economy concept picked its adoptive tipping point after the 2012 UN Conference on Sustainable Development. And it's the concept, he says, lacks a standard definition across sectors. But one of the things that's quite common is that it relates to the sustainable use and the exploitation of the ocean, seas, coastlines, and banks, lakes, rivers, and groundwater. And really, there's a very economistic view of the blue economy. And in that, there isn't really some of the other concepts around the notion of the blue is not really a foregrounded. Blue consciousness, blue health, blue spaces. These are all other literatures which are telling us about the nature of human relations with the sea. So this discourse was really very heavy for us. The blue economy concept, especially in South Africa with its blue economy strategy, Operation Pakisa, which basically means hurry up to leverage all the economic resources from the ocean. We see a similar narrative in Namibia. And if we look at the African Agenda 2063, also there is mention there of the leveraging of the blue economy. And we can understand why that is so, because I can't read the whole paper here, but essentially in South Africa, since the democratic elections in 1994, things haven't really gotten better. They've actually gotten worse. So we can see the crime levels that have gone up. We can see the crumbling of the infrastructure. There are many different challenges that are being presented, which makes the situation for local people very, very difficult. And this is why I was saying that as when I started off as a young field worker, I had this, you know, obviously enthusiasm and hopefulness, you know, going out into the field. But you know, when you spend a long time in communities and you realize actually, contrary to what the ethical clearance board is telling you in your university of how you must have objectivity and you must, you know, keep your distance from your research subjects, you know, that view, that what you, many instances, these are human beings that are, you know, connected to our fellow students or our neighbors. It's in the environment. We are part of that world. As part of the work, sorry, I'm trying to move this. Okay, but if I can't, it's basically from climate risk to climate change, but essentially what the slide is about is really, yes, thank you. It really basically is indicating, again, oh, thank you. It's really indicating again, I mean, how we as anthropologists, we had to work quite extensively with people in the social ecological field, people who are interested in ecosystems dynamics, and they were saying, yes, all right, then we'll just put people in. We'll just include them into the social ecological models, and that way the system will now reflect the complex adaptive systems, which is the word that they use, complex adaptive systems. As long as we have all of the elements in, we look at the ecosystem services. What does the ocean do for us? It provides us with resources from fish. It provides us with a place to for shipping, all of these things. As long as we just include the people, it'll work. And we said, no, it won't work, because you must understand that with the with not to over prioritize culture as a metric, as I said, within the social ecological systems, we're not going to prioritize culture, but we want to say that you must understand that culture in many ways has its own logic. It's not working with this. This is an understanding that is coming perhaps from an environment that is completely divorced from what is happening in the local context. So let me give a quick story. So we were interviewing a Xhosa chief in the Eastern Cape, not far from Patterson, actually, a wonderful river called the Biga River. And his house is located right on the banks of this river. It looks like it's a estuary leading out into the sea. And he told us a story about this river. And he said, leading out to the sea, and he says, now people come here to collect medicine for healing and divining and so on. All right. And then he said, you know, in this river, we also have the river snake. The Mamlambo is in this river. And then he told us a story about how a farmer came one day to dredge water from this river to pump it onto his farm. And then the machine stopped and wouldn't work, and all the workers ran away. And they were asking, he came to ask why. And they said, no, there's a Mamlambo in this river, a river snake, and it's actually the thing that has jammed it. You're not supposed to be drawing water from this river, because this river is sacred. This river has spiritual dimensions. In a way, it is a portal. So then the farmer didn't believe that, of course, and they had to bring in a healer diviner to come and deal with the machinery. And then only the machine started to work. But what the chief was basically telling us is that it's a mirror universe. It's a mirror universe. So basically what happens is that, to cut a very, very long story short, when people are called through the healing process, often through dreams and illness. So again, already the social ecological models fallen away. It's not even the present reality. It's a world of dreams. They're called through the dreams. They are then, they have to go and visit a particular healer diviner who will help them to discern where the issue is coming from and what remedies need to be put in place for them to either accept their calling as a twaza, as a initiate healer diviner, or to perform a series of rituals that can potentially release them from this obligation. And this particular chief in the Eastern Cape said that it's literally a mirror universe. In other words, when you see the ocean, you're basically seeing the physical manifestation of something that is in this particular dimension, but it's not beneath the ocean. There is and somewhere in the ocean, there is a completely different world. Then we had a conversation with a First Nations person in the Western Cape province in an area called Mossel Bay. And he was telling us that, in fact, the mountains, the Outeniqua Mountains, which is their part of the Garden Route, that it's part of an entire ecosystem, that it is intimately, not just biologically connected to the ocean, but it's spiritually connected to the ocean. And that any rituals that happen on the mountain is going to impact what's happening in the ocean. And if anything happens in the ocean, it's going to have an impact. And so when we were carrying out these environmental impact assessments, practically for the work that we're doing, because we knew a little bit about coastal cultural heritage, we had to articulate that for the people who are involved in the EIAs. But the point I'm making here is that it's in a way, these are incommensurate worlds. To explain to people that, in fact, what we're looking at, the ocean here, it's a spiritual sacred site. It's not just the body of water. And the remedies, if you're going to have any remedies, the remedies must also be cultural. They cannot be social, ecological. They have to be cultural, because we have, in a way, to achieve some level of commensurability. The other layers that we had to attend to, of course, the scholarly legislative attention to coastal heritage, and there are many of those. The climate policies, the international policies regarding heritage conservation, which really, in Southern Africa specifically, intangible cultural heritage, there's a passing mention of living heritage, passing mention of intangible cultural heritage. Coastal heritage, hardly anything at all in RC. Most of it has to do with buildings and artifacts and so on. And I mean, there's a paper that was produced last year on the National Heritage Resources Act of South Africa, which requires complete remedying. So what were the findings that basically led us to the Blue Journey project that I'm going to share with you? So in Kenya, basically what we were finding is that people were living with water. So they live on the delta. And on the delta, the water is, it supplies almost everything that they need. People take their animals across, literally the cows, they pull them along the water. I hope I've got an image of that. Yeah, I can't remember if I put it in. They literally carry animals along the water. There is, they have fish traps. They eat a variety of things. So they don't just eat what is given by the quota, fishing quota, like in South Africa, where you must, if you want to have fish, you must get this one in a particular season or that one in a particular season. The palates are more varied. They will eat a variety of different things. And so in a way already the mindset is more open. You're living with this dynamic water, the delta waters, the tides are rising, going down. You have the historical stories of people coming down the East African Swahili coast that have brought with them their own knowledges and philosophies. For example, in Lamu, Kenya, by interviewing one captain, we discovered that there are 7 different kinds of winds that the captains basically need to be aware of when they're sailing the dhow out in that open ocean. And that they even have the idea that as a captain, you must actually sink your ship. You cannot be a captain if you have not sunk. So they deliberately sink the ship, especially in the delta waters, so that if they go out into the open ocean and they actually sink there, they know not to panic. They know how to deal with it. And everybody who's on that boat also knows what to do. And in fact, during just one little aside, during the dhow races in Lamu, Kenya, they will, to make the boat lighter, they will literally throw people off. People need to learn how to be thrown off the boat. So it's a completely different idea, this, company institutional idea of everybody's on the ship. Well, sometimes people get thrown. The resilience factor through the intangible cultural heritage is also through music. Young children you know, that have inherited musical traditions and practices, songs about resilience and so on, that is still continuing in Lamu, Kenya today. Sorry about that. I did something. Help me. And as you can see, yeah, the fish traps that are common to large parts, it's in Lamu, it's in Mozambique, it's in Mauritius. These are all people that are coming from a similar, I think, pool of humans from the time of pre-colonial times from slavery. And learning various things, basket weaving. There's a lot of sustainable existence. So the coconut, as you know, in the islands is something that helps people to do many different things. It's the drinking of it's the husks, it's the basket weaving. They use it to put the coconut milk in to spice their food. The level of sustainability, sustainable kind of living is actually quite high. But the storytelling also helps. The storytelling helps to bridge the gap between the generations so that people know what were some of the things that were done before. Oh, I've got it. Here's the picture. So, so everything moves along this water. The school, the children get taken over to the equivalent of their stone town in Lamu. You know, people attend the weddings, and the boats themselves are really fascinating. They have names and they have all sorts of encouragements that are on them, something that the phenomenon still to be studied. But the point I'm making here is that these people are used to living with the uncertainty of the water, because at any point in time in that delta, the weather can change very dramatically, very quickly. And so there is this, you know, this idea that, okay, we can see now the weather's changing and we have to move very quickly. Which is perhaps something that would not happen to people who are living in a coastal area where they haven't seen such changes over a period of time. In South Africa, it was very interesting. There were generational differences, but there were also, as I mentioned in the masterclass earlier today, there were also these new social formations, new groups of people that had different kinds of stories to tell. So in the image on the left side of the screen is a surfer from Langebaan on the west coast of South Africa. And he told us about how on the sea, on the lagoon in Langebaan, when they are surfing, there's a whole class structure that is on that ocean. You have the newcomers and the people that have been there. There are those who know the secret beaches and the secret waves, and there's an etiquette. And some of them spend up to 8 hours in the water a day. That's a very long time to spend in the water. And then literally they have a kind of dopamine response to the water. So if they don't get the water, they have it's like a high if they don't get access to the water. We also did field research in Cork Bay, and there we were looking at women and women's responses to the ocean. And we're seeing the blue health, we were seeing the psychosocial aspects where women were doing these constitutionally cold dips every morning. Icy water, 3, 4, 5 minutes in the water to basically re-energize the body. And it's a well-known aspect of basically strengthening the immune system. In fact, we even heard, I was saying to the master student, we even heard the women saying liver cells grow, spleen cells grow as they're actually getting into the water to kind of manifest the immune response. But there are also people returning back to nature. So on the right side of the image, you have what are known as the sackcloth Rastafarians, or the sackcloth manner in South Africa, in Cape Town. And literally they've abandoned, like in the Old Testament, they've literally abandoned the trappings of modernity and all the uncertainties and challenges that come from that. And they're going back into the mountains to understand the indigenous roots and medications and spirituality and reconnecting with nature. These are all coastal communities. They're all people who have, when we ask them, what does the sea and what does nature mean to you? They were telling us about resilience as a return. You return back to nature. or you lose yourself in the water as the surfers do, or you try to shore up your own immune system and your strength. So yeah, so this is us interviewing people, and this was interesting. This was in a also West Coast town called Hunklip. And what was fascinating there is that they literally, it was just like remembering the past. One of their tactics for dealing with the challenges is that they literally stopped time. So for them, this place, the bar in that place actually even says it, time is an illusion, time, where time is an illusion. So in essence, they were in complete denial. So a form of resilience, a complete denial of the reality of what is going on in and around. In fact, a lot of people came to live in this small town to basically escape the frenetic pace of life in the more modern city. Yeah, and some people were just enjoying what was left of it. Time is going, I'm aware of that. Very briefly then, in Seychelles, I don't know how much time I've got left, Prof.
5 minutes.
Okay, I'll wrap up.
Sure.
Finding Seychelles, quick. Seychelles was very interesting because when I was doing the postdoc work funded by NWO some 20 years back, I was looking at what was going on, because Seychelles was at a very high debt levels at the time. People were being forced to basically have multiple incomes. And I was thinking, okay, this is a response, it's an adaptation to the socialist state, sort of socialist democratic state that was really requiring them to have multiple sources of income. But actually it wasn't. It was an adaptation from the post-slavery period, where people would work in the fields, then they would go and fish, and they would go and do something else, and they would have these multiple livelihoods as a strategy for resilience. And what I saw 20 years later in Seychelles, in October last year, is that literally people were dividing themselves between the ocean and the sea. Because now there's huge commercial interest in the fish in Seychelles. That's how the government is making the money, through the commercial fishing. And there's not much that's left over for local people. So what has happened is that the people, and I talked about this in a paper that I gave in February, there's a slight return deep into the forest. And the forest has meaning for the people of African slave descent, because that is where they were in the time of slavery, where they were kept in the forest. So the forest has all of these magical, mystical powers. And the forest is the place where possibilities for trance and defying time, that it's a place where that becomes possible. So people are split between these two different places. And this lady was telling us a story. She's weaving here a basket for me, showing me how to sustainable, not carrying plastics. Phenomenal accounts of going out into the ocean, women fishers on the reefs, which I don't know. And these are the forests that I'm talking about in Seychelles. People going back into those forests. To play music again, to use music as a source of trance. And exhibitions. So yes, so what was it about? Three minutes, I can tell you then. So the Blue Values journey, really, it's a philosophy. It's an idea about understanding resilience in a time of climate change, and also leveraging those stories to put them in a digital space, film, social media, reels, blogs, to ensure that it reaches a much wider audience, because I think that these are skills, that psychosocial skills, cultural skills that we're all going to need. And the thing is, when I was a undergraduate student many years ago, one of the things that we were told, not told, but it was kind of expressed to us, that that anthropology really is for the academic domain. It's not you're going to write papers and you're going to publish and attend conferences and things like that, but perhaps it's not going to go beyond that. And so we are what we've done is to raise funding through the various private sector entities to basically fund this digital social media platform project. And we are producing the research team, not me. I'm involved in maybe a few storyboards and the kind of imaginative, creative work behind the audiovisual outputs. But we're producing 7 documentary films on human relations with the sea, as well as multiple blogs and social media outputs. We really discovered some fascinating things. These are the key, more or less academic findings, along with the ones that I've already shared with you. And these stories are really, really fascinating accounts of how people are living with different ideas of time that have got nothing to do with modernity. They're walking in the world, but they're in a different magical realist landscape that has got nothing to do with environmental impact assessments. And we feel it's important for national governments to know this because, especially in South Africa, where we have a constitution that respects cultural diversity, and the fact that we have many member states that have signed the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and their rights to express their cultural diversity in Southern Africa and also in the Indian Ocean region, that these stories and these alternative ways of living and perceiving reality should also be taken into account. Yeah, we're dealing with many different things, including, really harnessing funding from entities that perhaps might not let go of it so easily, to really put those messages out there. That's it. Thank you very much.